Mr. Haughey.
Are you well?
I'm very good.
Good man.
Good.
Sit down a sec. You're very good to meet me.
No problem at all. I brought a little bit extra, with me just to give to you. You might be interested.
I'm in Cork City in Ireland, meeting a man who can paint a picture for me of a time in the city's history that is very significant to the John Sisk and Son company that we know today.
Yeah, I just want to introduce myself as Liam O'Higgin, and I'm a self-taught local historian. I'm very well up in the history of Cork City especially, and I was born and reared in the city centre in the Marsh area, down by the Mansion House, which is now known as the Mercy Hospital, and the whole area is steeped in history, not just up around the south side, but all over the city. Great history there if people just go to the bother of trying to find out what it's all about.
The part of Cork's history that we're interested in today is the birth of a man called John Sisk in 1837, the subsequent birth of his independent contracting company, and the living conditions of that time that shaped John Sisk's social conscience and the early values of the company.
Back in the 1800s, now 1860s, it was just a slum area. All the area now I'm talking about is where Prosperity Square is, and St. Nesson Street and St. Finbar Street, Kevin Square, all them, Industry Street, Industry Place. Like, they were just slums. So you can imagine what it was like.
The Cork City that John Sisk grew up in, what he saw around him and what he set out to do about it is a fundamental part of the story of Sisk. And so that's where we are going to start this series. This is Inside Sisk, a podcast series about the 160-year-old family-run company that has built so many of the places where we live, work, play and pray. I'm Patrick Haughey, and throughout this series I will be meeting the people behind the projects, the engineers, carpenters, site managers, bid managers, apprentices, directors, and so many more of the people who create the designs, solve the problems and build the structures that Sisk is so famous for. This is the very first episode of the series, so I will be finding out where it all began, in the company of Liam O'Higgin, who you just met, and also by two Sisk family members, Christine and Hal. A company's early days in business lays the foundations for how it approaches projects, how it treats its people, and the impact that it has on the community and the society in which it operates. These are commonly known as the company's values. And in this episode, we will hear about the early days of Sisk and how the company grew and evolved, the values that were established along the way, and how the Sisk family tried to keep those values intact and relevant and ready for the next generation. So before we meet Hal and Christine, let's go back to that bench in the grounds of Elizabeth Fort in Cork City on a sunny September day, where historian Liam O'Higgin continued to describe what life was like in the city where John Sisk and the Sisk company were born. And so what would a slum have been like back then?
A slum would have been a small cottage. Small cottages, but others were tenement houses where you could have 5 or 6 families living in a tenement house. And I mean, they might have 2 rooms and they might have 7 or 8 children. So you'd have a whole family in 2 rooms. You know, the conditions were terrible. No sanitation, probably 1 toilet out the back for the 4 families. Cold water, no such thing as a bath or hot water or anything like that. So that's a fairly accurate description of the way things were at the time. And
a little later on, we are going to hear about what John Sisk did in response to what he saw at the time. But first, we are going to meet Sisk family member Hal, who has the unofficial title of family historian, to tell us a little bit of the story of John Sisk and the evolution of the company from that point onwards.
I love history, maritime history, and I'm actually chairman of the Association of Yachting Historians internationally, but I love the story of the company, and it's remarkable. The story starts way back in 1859 when John Sisk qualified as a master plasterer and got married. So that was the point at which he went out on his own. Now, in those days, Cork was typical of most towns and cities that there were guilds of craftsmen, and you could not become a craftsman, a tradesman, unless you had a blood connection with the trade. So his father was Patrick Sisk, was a plasterer, and but his parents died of the cholera epidemic at Cork in 1848, and then John Sisk, the young man, a boy, was apprenticed with a Quaker family of plasterers by the name of Martin. So even though he was Catholic, they were Quakers. That didn't matter. The important thing was that you were a blood relation. So his first huge contract by the standards of the time was the building of the church in Castle Island in Kerry in 1871. So that's 150 years ago. It's nice to think of there's a Sisk building that has stood all that time. After that, he went on in his obituary in the Irish Builder. It's recorded that he built 21 churches. That was the big activity at the time, right? After the famine, there was a economic recovery, and it's strange that they don't record in the obituary many of the commercial buildings, but there are a few, like the Munster and Leinster Bank on the South Mall in Cork. But the real breakthrough came when the business moved to Dublin in the 1930s. Now, let's go back to the name, John Sisk and Son. The funny thing is that one can get asked, are you the son? And I answer, no, the son was my grandfather. So there's the original John Sisk, his youngest son was John Valentine Sisk. Now, he went out on his own as a builder in the 1890s, and when his father fell ill, he joined his father, and then the company became John Sisk and Son. So they refer specifically to the great-grandfather, the founder of the company, and his son. So there was no work going on in Cork, and my father, who decided to move the business, to open a branch in Dublin. 1937, he and his wife, my mother, and Herbert Dennis, his first cousin, the three of them, only three people, right? My mother was working as secretary for my father. They moved to Dublin.
That must have been a tough decision, and it was very much driven around the circumstances at the time.
Oh, absolutely. It was moving from Cork to Dublin was like emigrating. When you think about the roads and the rail connections in those days, a friend of mine has a telephone directory from 1938, and it's about 3 millimeters thick, right? And in that, the first 8 pages tell you how to make a telephone call. So that's how poor communications were. So they found a home in Ranelagh. And what was particularly difficult for my father, although the company had a reputation for over a long period for building in Cork and in Munster, my father was especially challenged because he was actually a reserved, a shy man. He found making speeches a huge challenge, right, at openings, right? He was the very opposite of. He was the least clubbable person I know. He didn't drink, like his grandfather and like me. I continued that part of the family tradition, although others may not. Right?
Wow, that's harsh.
And so as I say, the least clubbable person you could imagine. So he was far, far removed from the brash marketeer, and yet he had to break into a difficult, cosy contracting scene in Dublin and actually get on tender lists and win contracts by being, well, first of all, the first yardstick, of course, the lowest tender, but also to prove that you're the best man for best company for the job. As I said, the first job was in Whitehall.
But how did he do that? How did he actually break into that circle?
Well, it's a question of architectural practices had the first call, made the first call in that respect. So if you had built a church or a school or a bank for somebody in, for example, in Fermoy, right? For an architect, then that architect might be based in Dublin, and you would try to get on a tender list with those architects. That was simply how, and of course you try to get on the tender list with the work from the OPW, the Office of Public Works, etc. So it meant going around and basically begging to be considered.
Well, John G. Sisk's strategy at the time was a successful one, and a little later Hal will describe some of his father's major successes and the innovative thinking and strategy that lay behind them. But firstly, here's a really quick recap on where we are so far in terms of the family history. So, the founder of the company was John Sisk, who was born in 1837. One of John's sons was named John V, and he took over the company after his father's passing. The company was in a period of decline when he took over, but John V breathed life back into Sisk, and some major projects were completed during that time. John V had a son called John G, and he was the man who had the vision to expand the company into Dublin in 1937 at the age of 26. John G was the father of Hal, who you just met, and he had a granddaughter called Christine, who you are about to meet now. I asked Christine about her memories of her grandfather.
Now, he was very much a part of our lives. We were very fortunate that he lived a very long and healthy life. So we all had very strong, clear memories of him. But as Hal said, he was, in essence, he was a family man. He was, he wasn't massively social in the sense of going out, but he really enjoyed his family. And he enjoyed, in the latter part of his years, there would be a steady stream of his grandchildren coming for lunch one day a week. Because we were working at that stage, and most of us were working in Dublin and working in companies, firms that you could bolt out to Rathgar and bolt back into town, or for the guys who were working in the business, a little bit more latitude. So you'd pop in and you'd spend 40 minutes at lunch, and then you'd head back out again. And you'd hear your chats, or you'd hear his great witticisms, which would possibly a comment on how you looked that day, which could go down the lines of you need to shave a couple of pounds off there. So he wasn't backward about coming forward with his thoughts and opinions, but he was a really warm man. He was just lovely.
And so your father was his son.
Yes.
Did they share characteristics, or were they very different people?
Oh, God. That's actually a really interesting question as to which one of the three boys I would consider most like Grandad. I don't have an overriding sense that anyone in particular is very much like him personality-wise. Hal is definitely a lot more outgoing than necessarily possibly John and George. They would both be more reserved. Dad, how should I say, Hal is very much the right person for this podcast. Dad would do it and he'd be good in the information, but it's not his comfort zone, and nor would I say it is necessarily John's comfort zone either. So, as a family, you have possibly Hal was very much his mum's personality, because she was very engaging, very charming, and knew how to work that, and you had to, she would have really helped Grandad. As Hal said, they both came to Dublin with Herbert Dennis, and he was, I'm about the job, whereas Grandmom was, okay, we need to get ourselves known, we need to put ourselves out there, we need to knock on doors, and she would have been very capable in that front.
If anybody goes on the Sisk website or reads anything about Sisk, we can see just the phenomenal buildings and the landmarks that Sisk has created. When you were growing up, was this, and you would drive around the city of Dublin, would you see them? Would you see them and take them for granted? Or as you got older, was it something that you maybe developed a bit more pride or attention for?
I would certainly say as you got older, you became a lot more aware of what was left behind, so to speak. So if you're talking about legacies, that the wonderfully unique thing about construction is you build buildings and they don't go away. So they exist and they stay there. And so from one generation to another, you can drive by and go, we built that. And there is a huge sense of pride in that. But that probably, we weren't aware of that as such as young children. And it was probably in your teenage years that you became a lot more aware of what was around you and what was very obvious of a contribution that the company had made. So as young people know, and I think that goes back to a degree of who we are as a family and a wider family, that wasn't where the attention was brought. You were just a kid like any other kid. Your dad went to work, he did his job. So there was no, my children, I would say, have a greater awareness possibly than we did.
Why?
I think things are more obvious now. Hoarding is more obvious. Social media has pushed awareness to the forefront, not to the forefront, to how should I say, more visual than it would have been 20 years ago. So I have an 11-year-old son, and he would be very aware of the stadiums that we have built, and there's a lot of pride in him for that. And he, and he says it. He would talk about it in a very matter-of-fact way. It's just they did. Grandad and his granduncles, that's what they did. They built those things. So I went to college in UCC, and I suppose that was for me also the beginning of just seeing more. It was going back to where we came from and seeing what was around and what existed. And that for me, I suppose, was a real awakening of just, I suppose, the breadth and scale of it.
Well, what did you see in Cork?
You'd walk around and you'd kind of go, oh, we built that and we built that, and it was the first time, I suppose, in a way that somebody would my surname was more common than it had been in Dublin, and it would be, were asked far more frequently, were you related to the builders? And you'd go, yes. And then somebody would go, oh, did you know such and such? Do you know such and such? And at that point I'd have to go, no, sorry, I don't. I'm an interloper here, most definitely. So it's, the churches that were built were huge. And they're kind of dotted around Cork, and the bank, the Munster Bank. So the pride in the history that goes behind me began to kick in.
The family's pride in the history of Sisk and in the iconic buildings that Sisk has built would not have been possible had the company not won the tenders in the first place. And in order to win tenders, the company, of course, had to exist. And its existence was, and still is, down to bravery, innovative thinking, and excellent people management. We've already talked about the bravery of John G. Sisk's move and expansion into Dublin. But what about an example of innovation and people management?
One of the remarkable features of the early modern era was that my father, Christine's grandfather, was able to form partnerships, joint ventures. Now this is quite a common feature now, but was very rare in the 1950s. So he established, for the building of a bridge in Wexford, a joint venture with a Dutch company who approached him, called the Hollands-Betonmaatschappij. And that company eventually became Ascon, and it continued as a 50-50 company for 35 years. That too is a tribute to the capacity to work in partnership. It subsequently was taken over because Hollands-Betonmaatschappij went bust. This is a feature of construction, and that's why.
But not of Sisk.
What?
But not of Sisk.
Not, thankfully.
Touch wood.
And it became then, and eventually they approached us to buy our share, and we sold our share, and that subsequently Hollands Beton went bust, and it eventually was taken over by BAM. But it's still the case that it's the second largest construction company in Ireland. So my father has the amazing claim to have refounded the largest construction company in Ireland, in John Sisk and Son, and have co-founded the second largest. Although we've emphasised the role of my father, Christine's grandfather, he couldn't have done it without a marvellous team of people that he built up. And not only had he had that capacity to joint venture, to partner with other companies, but he also had a phenomenal ability to delegate. So to bring people on, bring them on in the company. It's important that to mention that the first non-Sisk managing director was a man who came into the business as a clerk, right, and without any third-level education, was given the opportunity to rise to the very top. Right?
Clerk? What would a clerk do? Sorry to interrupt you, just to set the scene.
Administrative, simply. He became an estimator, as it happened. So he never worked out on the sites, but he became our managing director, and that's very important, right, to mention. Seeing
the intrinsic skills and intelligence of people, regardless of their official training, is that something that you think has been very much part of the fabric of the company, maybe even since the 160 years ago?
Yeah. Our construction industry in Britain and Ireland is very much open to people with talent to make their way without necessarily the professional qualifications.
The training centre within Sisk, is very much feed into that, Christine?
Right, yeah. It does, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Grandad set up the training centre. What year was that, Al?
I think it must have been around the late 1950s.
Late 1950s. And that was trades, to bring trades in and to develop it. And it has grown and it has produced some phenomenal craftsmen and craftspeople, hopefully, moving forward, a lot more craftspeople. And it also has produced managers within the business. So it's a stepping stone, and I believe that we still have within the company that sense of, you might have a qualification and it gets you in the door, but it's the sum of the individual as opposed to just what's written on paper. Construction is a people business. That's our unique selling point. That's our major asset, is the people who work in this company. And without them, we don't win tenders. Without them, we don't deliver jobs on time. And without them, we don't bring the creativity that is needed to exist and keep going and survive. And it's creativity on many, many levels. It's creativity when things go wallop and things become very, very scary, but that you can find a way through and continue to deliver.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, you'll fall down into the city centre now from here, that's all downhill.
We're going to go briefly back to Cork and historian Liam O'Higgins. We have moved on from our bench in Elizabeth Fort and are now walking around the streets nearby, which are populated by red brick cottages. The cottages, maybe. So we're on St. Kevin Street here now, which is one of the streets that we're looking into.
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, Tree Hatchet Lane goes off up the hill here, which is now St. Kevin Street.
Yeah.
And before these houses were built there was tenement houses running over as far as Mount Carmel Road in Greenmount, and from Mount Carmel Road and then up towards the industrial school would have been farmland, really. You know, there was no houses or anything there. The houses in Greenmount weren't built until the 40s.
So these would have been the first houses built with foundations and proper structures.
Exactly, yeah. And you'd done away with an awful lot of tenement houses. Even down, if you look down the street here, down to where the cars come up there, and turn left, you have...
The houses we are looking at were built by John Sisk back in 1896. appalled at the living conditions of his employees in what was then the shanty town that Liam described earlier. John built 4 streets of terraced houses, totalling 80 dwellings, where his tradespeople could live in safety and comfort. Those streets were St. Kevin's, St. Finbarr's, St. Nesson's and St. Bridget streets. This approach to the care of its people has been something that the Sisk family have been determined to maintain and nurture throughout the evolution of the company. And the wider Sisk family have returned that care with loyalty.
We've been incredibly fortunate over the lifespan of this company we have intergenerational families working for us. You know, so
multi-generational.
Multi-generational, thank you, sorry. So you've got to look at it. We've people working for us whose grandfather worked for us, and there's a huge sense of pride in that we do something right that makes us attractive, that somebody feels that staying with us is worthwhile of their time, and that there are opportunities within the company for people to grow and develop, and that's really important now, because the market is a lot more fluid. There's some really good competition out there, and we've got some great people working for us who become very attractive propositions for other people. So I think it's about remembering that you have to create an environment where there is opportunity, where people can grow, where people are nurtured, that we focus and we listen to the needs and the requirements of the people who we work with, and that if it's work-life balance, if it's training, if it's improvement from a qualification point of view, that you're providing that for the people who work with us. And I think I would say that I'm really proud of the work that has been done in the last 3 to 5 years in how we are looking after the staff of Sisk from a mental health point of view, from looking at and trying to address the work-life balance so that construction becomes a far more inclusive employer. We have reinvented ourselves over the years in order to listen to the needs of both our customers and our employees. And I don't like using the word employees. If staff. I don't even like the word staff because that needs to be cut out. Team members, the people we work with, because they are the people we work with. And it's very easy to write on a sheet that we have over 2,000 employees and that 60% of our staff are now below a certain age. But if we're doing the job right, and I hope we are, that we are still being able to impart that sense of family and that sense of that you're building in any construction company. You're building structures that will last beyond you. This is the legacy that we have, and it's yes, you can drive by something, or if we talk about stories, I can remember, and Hal, I'm sure you did it with your guys. Before health and safety was what it was, we had great views on St. Patrick's Day because we were on any construction site that lined the route, and we were standing up there in the rain, in the sun, watching these parades go by. So huge perk of it. But those buildings now exist, they're occupied, they've had many lifetimes overs of stories and events in them, but they still exist. And that to me it's pretty phenomenal.
As well as having survived and thrived for over 160 years, one of the other most notable aspects of Sisk is that it has remained family owned for all of that time. So how does all that work? And what is involved in the passing of the company from generation to generation? I asked Christine if taking a role in the company business was and is expected of all family members.
No, it wasn't. So things have changed a lot. When I finished college, construction was still a very male-dominated business.
What did you study?
I did economics and sociology. so potentially a degree in waffle. The ability to make somebody see my point of view in any particular way.
Well, isn't that a very good skill to have?
Don't know about that. So no, how should I say, when I left college, there wasn't a role for a qualification like that. So construction was still very much driven engineering, QS, the traditional trades that came in to it. So there was no expectation. And I suppose I would also say to that, there wasn't any expectation, I don't believe, of any of my cousins that you have to do this, that this legacy, if you talk about that way, your legacy is this and this is what you must now go and do. So there was very much a view put forward that if you're the right person for it and if you have the right qualifications, absolutely there is an opportunity for you there. That's what you got. You got that opportunity. But it wasn't, there was no silver plate. There was no, you are so-and-so Sisk, so here you go. In you come. You've now got that office over there and everybody is going to go, oh, next generation is over there and away you go. And I would say moving forward, that is even more so the case, that there is an opportunity for any of the next generation to work within the company, but that is if they are qualified for it and they are the right person for the position that is open at that time.
But what drew you to join the company in that case?
What drew me?
Because with the qualification like that, you could have gone anywhere.
You know, I don't know about that.
And you did. You worked with.
I did. I had a very varied and checkered past. So, what we're shareholders. We are shareholders. So we are involved. It's in our DNA. This is ours, and it is ours for a period of time. And if we're custodians, there you go. We are custodians, and that's all we are, because if we do the job properly, the company will survive and it will get passed on to another generation of family members, and then it becomes their job. How should I say? I have two uncles and a father who are very good over the last number of years of telling us, it's yours now. Off you go. It's up to you to manage it and take care of it and ensure that it goes on into the future. What I would say is that if you talk to any of my generation, there was never any question as to people's conviction that this is what they want to be involved with, what they identify with, and what they want to see continue to grow, that will be there to be passed on to the next generation. So I suppose that's why I'm here. We're very fortunate as a group of people that being a Sisk was never put out as something fantastic, amazing, look at who you are, isn't this brilliant? It was just, that's your surname, this is what we do. If we do it well, we'll get the rewards for it. If we don't, you get the backlash for it. But was it ever difficult? No.
One question I'd like to put to both of you. Your grandfather, John G. Sisk.
Correct.
He passed away maybe, early 2000s?
2002, age 91. A good cricket score, he said.
Okay, very nicely put. What would John G. Sisk think about Sisk today?
Of course, what would John G. Sisk think of the company today? First of all, he would not be surprised that we are now working in Britain and in many countries within the European Union. After all, he did take the business to Africa when there was no business, there was insufficient work here in 1957. He would regret the extent to which the work is subcontracted, right? But that's a phenomenon of our time, right? And can it be denied? But I think on balance he would be chuffed and relieved, without ever admitting it, that the business has continued and has an excellent balance sheet and has a solid base for the future at this stage, after all the many ups and downs of the construction industry.
And Christine, same question to yourself.
God, I think Hal has covered it all right, to be quite honest with you.
Well, as a granddaughter, you might have a different perspective.
I do. I think he would be. I think he'd be pleased that it is still a company that provides interest to his grandchildren, that they're very passionate about, that they are involved with. I think he would absolutely balk at interviews and photos, but at the same time I think he would have just delegated to somebody who would go, you're much better at that than me, and off you go and do it. And I think he'd, as you said, I think he would be really quietly chuffed that we're still going, and we're doing well, we're doing very well, and that we have been able to continue to attract phenomenal talent that has helped us to continue to deliver.
And do you think, obviously his children and grandchildren have become part of the fabric of Sisk? Will the great grandchildren maybe be making an appearance down the line a little bit?
I don't know. They're still a few years off it. They get told that there is an opportunity, but they need to be the person for the job. But I really hope that it is attractive to one, at least, maybe two or three of them, that an opportunity does exist here for them and is something they're really interested in. I think they're all, we've kind of got two families of grandchildren in the group, so they're the ones that are kind of going into their mid-teenage years, and then we have our smally contingent coming up at the back. So there's, we're very lucky. We're kind of providing a really, really good solid flow for the future.
Am I right that relatively recently, speaking of next generations, your daughter played in Croke Park, which is obviously a Sisk construction?
She did. She was a very, very late convert to camogie. She moved schools and from one school to the other in 5th class and took up camogie. She's a great little sports player. And they were, I cannot remember the name of the competition, but they got through to the junior school finals. And it so happened that the final was played in Croke Park. So it was incredibly very, very enjoyable, and we're very proud, and Mum and Dad were there, and it was just one of those moments where you're just going, you sent her out onto the pitch, and I said, if nothing else from today, just remember we built this. And she kind of came back in and went, it's really big, it's huge out there. But yeah, it was really special. So it was. So
it's just the connectivity, isn't it? It's
how should I say? It's about making things relevant. So buildings are huge by their nature, and you can drive by them and you can kind of go, oh God, yeah, we built that. But when you can make it relevant, I suppose, to the next generation, that's when you're really laying the foundations, I suppose, of that pride, of that interest, of that passion, to keep it going. That you're to say, look, this is what we do.
Well, we're almost at the end of the very first episode of Inside Sisk, and hopefully it has given you a little bit of a sense of where it all began for the company, why and how the company values were formed and nurtured, and who is the family that has kept Sisk growing and evolving over the last 160 years. What was very apparent to me throughout my conversation with Christine and Hal was how much the family values the wider Sisk family, the people that work within the company, and how much they appreciate the work that they do. So before we went our separate ways, I asked Christine if there was anything she would like to say to her colleagues.
How about thank you? It is thank you. We are where we are because of the people that we work with, within the company and outside of the company. You know, we are where we are because of the staff that work with us, but also our suppliers and those who we build for.
Please join us on the next episode of Inside Sisk. If you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe to the series on Apple Podcasts and follow the series on Spotify. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.